Hello everyone and welcome to a video tutorial where I'm going to show you how to beat the Chigorin Defense. That comes after you start the game with d4, opponents play d5, c4, and then black is developing the knight to c6. There are quite a few ways that white could play, but I believe in order to get maximum advantage, we should be playing knight to c3 and immediately applying the pressure on the pawn on d5. Here, I believe that you're going to be facing two moves. One is going to be them taking the pawn on c4. That might look like a queen's gambit accepted, but it's going to lead to very different lines since we can push this pawn and dispatch their knight from the square on c6, and we're going to further keep pressuring the knight. We're going to observe those lines. First, let's take a look at another popular option at all levels, knight to f6. Over here, we're going to tease them into taking the pawn again, and that's one of the options that they have. However, that will lead right now to a very good move for white, e4. We're dominating the middle and we're also attacking the pawn on c4. Now, it makes sense for black often to be applying the pressure on this knight. Now, the danger is not on f3. The danger is that the knight is guarding the pawn on d4, which is currently under attack. So a typical tactic for black would involve usually removing the knight, followed by winning this pawn on d4. So what white does is they play bishop to e3. Notice that that pawn we hope to regain just a tiny bit later. Over here, players usually play e6. White is able to win the pawn back on c4. There comes another pin with pressure on e4. Notice how these pins, they're not posing danger on the pin piece itself, but rather it reduces the defensive efficacy of the pin piece, and now knight takes e4 becomes a real threat. So the simpler move here to play is queen to d3, simply guarding everything around in the center by the queen. And if black is, for example, taking on f3 and damaging our pawn structure, in this position we can comfortably castle queen side and then use the g-file to attack the black's king. So white gets really comfortable position. Instead, a lot of players simply castle. And here, a lot of the times, white needs to play knight to d2 in order to defend the e4 pawn. You see, if they ever take on c3, you kind of would want to take with queen, right? And then you don't want to be dropping this e4 pawn. So these positions are really looking very comfortable for white if you manage not to blunder any of these two pawns. And in the middle game, you have more space, more beautiful minor pieces with a clear plan of using that space to push further and increase the activity of your pieces even more. Now, as we go back after the move knight f3 very early, I have to show you also the line bishop to g4. This is very popular, and I believe this is the likeliest scenario that will occur in your games. In this position, we're simply going to be taking on d5. If our opponents take on d5, once again, we're able to put the pawn on e4 and grab this massive center in the Chigorin defense with white. Often players will first take on f3, they're counterattacking the queen, so we're going to get this pawn structure somewhat damaged. Then they're going to be taking on c3, and white has massive pawn center, which will allow our bishops to go to very decent squares, as well as use b or and the g files for our rooks. Black often plays e5. They want to somewhat close the position since they're playing against the bishop pair, and knights usually like more close positions. This also prepares the development of the bishop in some cases. So we're going to extend and win some space in the center and on the queen side. Black typically goes knight to b8 in order later to reroute the knight to d7, from where it can hope to reach squares like c5 or f6. And after rook g1, let's put a smile here for the white's position. It is very hard to be black over here. We're going to be playing rook to b1 and attack b7 in a very uncomfortable way. We are threatening all kinds of queen e4 checks in many positions, followed by bishop h3 with further application on likely the pin knight on d7. And white has massive advantage with the center, bishop pair, more active pieces. Look at the potential of the black's development and compare it to white. So as we go back, after knight to c3, we looked at the lines. After knight to f6 by black, I have to show what happens if they do take the pawn. So obviously, we're going to be pushing the pawn, kicking away the knight. Over here, knight to e5, I think you're going to be facing only. There's also a move knight a5, but I don't believe people will be playing that commonly at your level. So over here, we're going to be playing f4, kicking the knight even further. knight to d7 and e4 and look at the gorgeous center that we're creating for the white pieces. Later, we can be using fantastic squares, hopefully, for our pieces, like d4, bishop on c4, bishop on e3, and just have massive advantage in the middle game. Knight to b6, trying to make it harder for us to win the pawn back, so we're going to be playing a4, attempting to play a5, in order to kick away the knight and play bishop takes c4. So very often they will be playing a5. The price that both players paid for this a4, a5 inclusion is usually a weakening of the b5 versus b4 square. So black perhaps hopes to use it for the bishop at some point, and maybe we hope to use it by a minor piece later as well. So here we'll play bishop e3 with an obvious tactic. We want to take the knight and subsequently take the pawn on c4. Black plays e6, which applies pressure over here, but we're just in time to take the knight and then take on c4 in order to solidify this pawn on d5. So bishop to b4, black is taking control over that weakened square, and this would be one of the theoretical positions in which white has a very comfortable endgame. Black has double b pawns, an isolated e6 pawn. White can castle or even bring the king later to the center with king f2, king e3, king f3. Those are the options. And we're facing a very comfortable position where we play for 2 results. It's very hard to imagine black winning this if white doesn't make an obvious blunder. So I hope you enjoyed these lines and you're going to be feeling very comfortable playing against the Chigorin Defense next time. Thank you for watching. You can consider hiring me as your personal online chess coach, and I will see you in the next class. Bye-bye.